One Saturday afternoon, my phone rang, and before I even knew why, my body went cold. I looked at my wife and felt something shift inside me, something I could not yet explain. That moment would divide my life into before and after. My name is Mark Reynolds. I was 42 years old when I met Claire, and by then, I thought I understood how life worked. I had a steady career as a civil engineer, a quiet routine and clear plans. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and treated people well, life would stay solid under your feet. Meeting Claire made me believe that even more. I met her at a sustainable architecture conference. She was younger than me, full of energy, and deeply focused on her work. It was not just how she looked that caught my attention. It was the way her hands moved when she spoke, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about ideas that mattered to her. I was not a man who fell easily, but that day I felt certain about one thing. I wanted to know her. We dated for 2 years. I was never the man who surprised someone with flowers or planned dramatic dates. My love showed up quietly. I brought her coffee on hard mornings. I remembered the names of her co-workers. I woke up early on weekends to make the breakfast she liked. Claire told me she felt safe with me. After years of unstable relationships, she said my steadiness felt like home. We married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden outside Charlotte. Less than 50 people were there. I remember every detail. Her simple dress, the way her hands shook when she smiled at me, the tight hug she gave me when it was over. I promised myself I would always be the man she could rely on. The first years of marriage were exactly what I hoped for. We bought a quiet house in the suburbs and slowly made it ours. I spent weekends fixing things and improving the place. Claire focused on her career. We talked about kids sometimes, but she wanted to wait until she felt settled. I agreed. I trusted her timing. We were building something together. Our days followed a comfortable rhythm. I woke early, made coffee, and left a mug by her bed before work. I came home around 6. We ate dinner together, talked about our days, and spent quiet evenings side by side. It was not exciting, but it was good. Solid. When Claire turned 38, she got the promotion she had been working toward for years. I planned a special dinner to celebrate, remembering her favorite restaurant and the wine she once mentioned wanting to try. She was touched, and I felt proud that I had paid attention. The promotion came with travel. She would visit other cities to train teams, usually leaving Tuesday and returning by Friday. Company rules required her to travel with a coworker. She told me she would be paired with a man named Daniel. I did not feel worried. Trust had always been the foundation of our marriage. She called me every night while she was away. She talked about work, the team she met, and the pressure she felt. She mentioned Daniel sometimes, always casually. He was funny, she said. Helpful. A family man with kids. I listened, asked questions, and felt included in her life. When she came home, I made sure everything was ready. Clean house, dinner waiting, arms open. Sometimes she seemed tired or distant, but I told myself it was stress. I tried to be even more supportive. The Saturday that changed everything began like any other. I made breakfast. Claire came downstairs in jeans and a t-shirt, hair still damp from her shower. We talked about going to the bookstore later, and maybe dinner that night. The house felt peaceful. Ordinary. Safe. I checked work emails at the table while Claire read on the couch. The quiet was broken when my phone rang. I answered without checking the number. The voice on the other end was calm but strained. She asked if I was Mark Reynolds. I said yes. She introduced herself as Rachel Carter. She said she was the wife of the man my wife worked with. I felt something tighten in my stomach. Claire looked up from her book, watching me. Rachel paused, then spoke slowly, carefully. She said her husband had confessed to her the night before. She said that during a recent business trip, he had an affair with my wife. The room stopped moving. My mind refused to understand what I was hearing. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. Rachel kept talking, explaining that she had decided to forgive her husband, but that I deserved to know the truth. When the call ended, I lowered the phone slowly. Claire was still watching me, her book forgotten in her lap. She asked who it was. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and felt the ground beneath my life begin to crack. I told her it was Daniel's wife who had called. I said her name out loud and watched Claire's face change. In small ways she did not realize she was showing. Her eyes widened just a little, her shoulders stiffened, her fingers pressed into the cover of her book. She asked why Daniel's wife would call me. Her voice sounded normal, but it felt practiced. I told her exactly what Rachel had said, that Daniel had confessed, that the affair happened during the Atlanta trip, that it was just last week. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. Claire froze, completely still, for a few seconds that felt much longer. Then she stood up fast, her movements sharp and restless. She said it was ridiculous. She said Daniel must be confused, or that his marriage was falling apart and he made it up. She talked fast, waving her hands, trying to fill the space before I could speak. She reminded me that I had known her for 13 years. She said she could never do something like that. She told me to trust her. I stayed seated and watched her the way I watched problem areas at work, with focus and distance. I asked her why a man with a wife and 2 kids would destroy his own life with a lie. I asked her why Rachel would make that call if it was not true. She did not answer directly. She kept pacing, kept talking, kept insisting. I interrupted her and gave details Rachel had shared. The hotel, the city, the timing. All of it matched perfectly. That was when her story began to fall apart. Her hands started shaking. Her voice cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. She begged me to understand. She said she never meant for it to happen. I asked her one question. I asked if it happened or not, yes or no. She broke down completely. She sank onto the couch and started crying in a way I had never seen before. Loud, gasping sobs that sounded like they were tearing her apart. She said it happened once. Just once. She swore it meant nothing. I did not move. I did not speak. I let the silence force the truth out of her. She told me about the hotel bar, about how everyone else had left, about how tired and pressured she felt. She said they talked about feeling invisible and not being enough. She said one drink became 2. She said he touched her hand. She said she felt seen. Then she said they went to his room. As she spoke, something inside me collapsed. It was not just pain. It was the loss of the image I had carried of our marriage, of her, of myself, as a man who knew his wife. She said she regretted it immediately. She said she cried in the shower afterward. She said she and Daniel agreed it was a mistake and decided to bury it. She said she planned to tell me, but when she came home and saw me standing there with dinner ready, she could not do it. She said she thought if she pretended it never happened, it would disappear. I stood up slowly. My body felt calm in a way that scared me. Claire looked at me like a child, waiting for punishment or forgiveness. She asked where I was going. I told her I was packing a bag. She panicked and said that meant I was leaving. I corrected her. I told her she was leaving. I told her she had until noon the next day to find somewhere else to stay. She begged. She said we could fix this. She said one mistake should not erase 13 years. I turned and looked at her. There was no anger in me, no shouting, just a cold distance she had never seen before. I told her she had a week to tell me the truth and chose not to. I told her I had to hear it from the wife of the man she slept with. I told her that showed me who she really was. I went upstairs and started packing while she cried downstairs. Her sobs followed me through the house, filling rooms we had built together. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I called a lawyer I trusted. I explained everything calmly. He explained my options just as calmly. I took notes. I focused on facts because feelings felt dangerous. Claire tried to talk to me again and again. I did not respond. She cried, begged, and eventually accused me of being cold. I still did not respond. On Sunday at noon, she stood at the door with 2 suitcases. She looked exhausted, older, smaller. She asked me one last time to reconsider. I told her some marriages survive betrayal. Ours would not. She asked if I was even willing to try. I asked her if she tried when she was in that hotel room. She had no answer. She left, and the sound of her car pulling away felt final. The divorce moved fast. She did not fight. She accepted the terms. The house stayed with me. Accounts were divided. She asked for nothing. 4 months later, it was over. But the silence she left behind was louder than anything I had ever known. After the divorce was finalized, I realized how quiet life could really be. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your chest when the noise of another person disappears. 13 years of shared routines vanished overnight, and every room in the house felt wrong. I tried to stay there. I told myself walls were just walls, and memories could not hurt me. That lie lasted 2 months. I could not sleep in the bedroom we shared. I could not drink coffee in the kitchen where she had confessed. Every corner carried something broken, so I sold the house. I moved into a modern apartment downtown. Clean lines. New furniture. No history. I needed a space that did not remember her. Work became my refuge. I stayed late, took on harder projects, buried myself in calculations and deadlines. My coworkers praised my focus. They did not know it was survival. Friends tried to reach out. Some told me I was being too harsh. They said people make mistakes. I listened politely and then stepped away from them. A mistake was forgetting an anniversary. What Claire did was a series of choices. I could not allow anyone to minimize that. Over time, the sharp pain dulled. Not because I forgot, but because I learned how to live around it. Trust did not return, not even close. I stopped imagining a future with anyone. I focused on building a stable present. 18 months after the divorce, I was at the public library researching building codes for a new project. That was where I first saw Lena. She was sitting at a table nearby, surrounded by books on landscape design. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her reading glasses kept sliding down her nose. What caught my attention was how focused she was. The way she bit her lip while reading. The way she smiled quietly when she found something interesting. I felt curiosity, something I had not felt in a long time. I did not talk to her that day, or the next. On the third visit, she noticed me and smiled, recognizing me as the man always buried in paperwork nearby. She asked if I was working on something heavy. I told her I was reading building codes. She laughed and said she was researching sustainable gardens. We joked about how glamorous our work was. Conversation came easily. She was warm without being intrusive, open without pushing. She told me she was a landscape architect and divorced. Her marriage had ended quietly, without drama. They had grown apart. She spoke without bitterness. We started meeting at the library, then for coffee, then dinner. I told her about Claire, about the betrayal, about my fear of trusting again. She listened carefully and never rushed to fix anything. One night, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, she said broken trust leaves scars. I told her scars never disappear. She smiled and said scars are proof that healing happened. With Lena, life felt lighter. She did not need me to be perfect or unshakable. She accepted my silence when I needed it, and my honesty when I was ready. Slowly, without me realizing it, I fell in love again. We married 2 years later. The ceremony was small. Just family and close friends. Lena wore a light blue dress. She said white belonged to first marriages. I thought it suited her perfectly. A year later, she told me she was pregnant. Fear came first, then joy. When our son Nathan was born, I understood love in a way I never had before. Holding him made every painful step that led me there make sense. Life finally felt whole again. 3 years later, on a Sunday afternoon, I took Nathan to the park. I was pushing him on the swing when I noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench across the playground. It took a moment to recognize her. It was Claire. She looked thinner, tired. Older in a way time alone could not explain. There was no child with her. She was just sitting there, watching other families. Our eyes met. Her face filled with recognition and something like regret. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. I gave a small nod, polite, distant. She nodded back and tried to smile. Nathan asked me to push him higher, and I turned my attention back to my son. When I looked again, Claire was gone. A few minutes later, Lena joined us with ice cream. She smiled at Nathan and handed me my favorite flavor. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. But later that night, sitting on the porch after Nathan was asleep, I told her the truth. I told her I had seen Claire at the park. Lena listened quietly, then asked how I felt. I thought about it carefully. I felt no anger, no sadness, no victory. I felt free, and that surprised me more than anything else. Part 3. After the divorce was finalized, I learned what real silence felt like. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest when a life you built with someone suddenly disappears. 13 years of habits, routines, and shared space were gone, and every room in the house felt wrong. I tried to stay there at first. I told myself a house was just walls, and memories only had power if you let them. That belief lasted about 2 months. I could not sleep in the bedroom we once shared. I could not stand in the kitchen where she had looked me in the eyes and lied. The house felt contaminated by what had happened. So I sold it. I moved into a modern apartment downtown. Everything was new. New furniture. New view. No history attached to the walls. I needed a place that did not remind me of her. Work became my escape. I stayed late, took on difficult projects, and filled my mind with numbers and plans. People at the office said I was more focused than ever. They did not know I was just trying to survive. Some friends tried to pull me back into social life. A few told me I was being too harsh. They said people make mistakes and marriages can recover. I listened politely and then slowly distanced myself. A mistake was forgetting an anniversary. What Claire did required choices, one after another. I could not share space with people who reduced betrayal to something small. Time passed. The pain did not disappear, but it lost its sharp edges. Trust did not return, but I learned how to live without it. I stopped imagining a future that included anyone else. I focused on building a stable present. 18 months after the divorce, I was at the public library researching building codes for a project. That was where I first noticed Lena. She sat at a table nearby with a stack of books about landscape design. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, and her reading glasses kept slipping down her nose. What caught my attention was not her beauty, but her focus. She read like the world around her did not exist. She smiled quietly when she found something interesting. For the first time in a long while, I felt curiosity about another person. I did not speak to her that day. Or the next. On the third visit, she looked up, recognized me, and smiled. She asked if I was buried in heavy research. I told her I was reading building codes. She laughed and said she was researching sustainable gardens. The conversation felt easy. She told me she was a landscape architect, divorced. No bitterness in her voice, just honesty. We started talking more, first at the library, then over coffee, then dinner. I told her about my marriage, about the betrayal, about how hard it was for me to trust. She listened without judgment and never pushed me to move faster than I could. One night, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, she said broken trust leaves scars. I told her scars never fully disappear. She smiled and said scars are proof that healing happened. With Lena, life felt lighter. She did not expect me to be perfect or unbreakable. She accepted my silence and my honesty. Slowly, without me realizing it, I fell in love again. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony with only family and close friends. Lena wore a light blue dress. She said white was for first marriages. It felt right. A year later, she told me she was pregnant. Fear came first, then joy. When our son Nathan was born, I understood a deeper kind of love. Holding him made every painful step before feel meaningful. Life finally felt complete again. 3 years later, on a Sunday afternoon, I took Nathan to the park. I was pushing him on the swing when I noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench. It took a moment to recognize her. It was Claire. She looked thinner and tired, like life had been heavy on her. There was no child with her, just quiet observation. Our eyes met, and recognition filled her face, mixed with regret. I gave her a small nod. Nothing more. She nodded back and tried to smile. Nathan asked me to push him higher, and I turned back to him. When I looked again, she was gone. That evening, after Nathan was asleep, Lena and I sat on the porch. I told her I had seen Claire. She asked how it made me feel. I thought carefully. I felt no anger, no sadness. I felt free. Lena listened without interrupting. She always did. She closed her book and turned toward me, giving me her full attention, the kind that made you feel safe enough to be honest. I told her Claire had looked tired. smaller somehow, like the life she imagined for herself never quite arrived. I told her seeing her did not hurt the way I once thought it would. It felt distant, like looking at a chapter I had already finished reading. Lena asked if I felt anything at all. I sat with the question for a moment, watching the porch light attract small insects in the dark. I told her I felt grateful. Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for where it had led me. If Claire had not made the choices she did, I would not be sitting there beside Lena. I would not be a father. I would not know this quiet, steady happiness that filled my life now. Lena smiled softly and reminded me of what she once said. Scars are proof we survived. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and the weight of the past finally felt lighter than the present. In the weeks that followed, I thought about Claire less and less. Not because I was forcing myself to forget, but because there was nothing left to resolve. She was living with the outcome of her decisions. I was living with mine. Work continued. Life continued. Mornings with Nathan became my favorite part of the day. His laughter filled spaces that once echoed with silence. Every milestone reminded me that life had not ended when my marriage did. It had simply changed direction. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and Nathan was asleep, I thought back to that Saturday afternoon. The phone call. The way my hands shook as I held the phone. The moment I looked at my wife and knew everything was about to fall apart. At the time, it felt like the worst day of my life. Now, I understood it differently. It was the day I stopped living in a story built on lies and started building something real. Something honest. Something strong. I learned that love is not proven by how long you stay, but by how truthful you are while you are there. I learned that trust, once broken, does not demand forgiveness. It demands respect for yourself. Most of all, I learned that endings are not failures. Sometimes they are corrections. One Sunday afternoon, months later, Lena and I took Nathan back to the same park. He ran ahead of us, fearless and joyful. I watched him and felt something settle deep inside me. I was no longer the man frozen by a phone call. I was a husband who was chosen every day, a father who was present, a man at peace with his past. As the sun dipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, Lena reached for my hand. I squeezed it gently, grateful for the road that led me here, even with all its sharp turns. Some structures collapse beyond repair, and that is not always a tragedy. Sometimes, it is the only way to build something better.